Maintaining healthy ecosystems is particularly important because the ecosystem is where we essentially grow most of our food. So the better we can keep the health of the ecosystem maintained, the more food we can produce, and we can also have less of an impact on the environment as a result.
If you think about New Zealand historically, it was almost completely covered in forest. And so we've seen a huge change across the landscape as that forest has been converted into food production systems. And now pasture and horticultural crops are probably the dominant land use type across New Zealand. So that's obviously had a negative impact.
Food production is having many impacts on our native flora and fauna. For example, the introduction of pests and diseases into those ecosystems are having an untold impact on those species. The importance of saving our native species and the ecosystems they live in is because it's part of who we are as New Zealanders. It's their identity. Imagine New Zealand without Kiwi or Kauri or Tuatara. They represent who we are as a people. But also a lot of our native biodiversity, like our native insects, do a lot of mahi for our food producers. They pollinate crops. So, you know, they're part of who we are, but they're also part of a healthy, functional ecosystem. So they bring all the benefits that we as New Zealanders want in our country.
Insects play a variety of really critical roles in ecosystems. For example, insects can be critical in pollinating plants to produce the seeds and the fruit that we harvest, as well as seeds for natural plants. But also they can help to control pest insect species, and they play a critical role in decomposition, so it's recycling nutrients in the environment to make those nutrients available again for plants to grow. But I think what's surprising is you actually find many native species that could be insects, plants, birds, actually do well in farming systems. And there's things that we can do to actually support those populations and ensure they continue to contribute to the health of the ecosystems they live in. One of the things we're trying to understand in plant and food is what sort of habitat insects require in order to survive in farming systems and orchard systems. So we're doing a lot of work to understand what are the plant species that are associated with the good insects that we want, and also how to avoid planting plants that might be encouraging pest populations. And from there, we want to then understand, once we know who's doing the work, how do we support those populations? How can we provide habitat through planting, or even adding extra things to our planting, like rotting wood, that provides the right environments for insects to thrive in our farms and orchards.
A big part of what we do at Plant and Food Research is around trying to understand what the environmental impact is of our food production systems, and also what mitigations we can impose to try and minimise the environmental impacts. Soil is a big part of our land. That's where we grow our food, and the soil is very capable of supplying a lot of the nutrients and the water that is needed to grow our food, except often it doesn't have enough, and we do need to actually put more nutrients and more water into the system to produce the amount of food that we require. And so one of the main nutrients that we often talk about is nitrogen. Nitrogen is the building blocks of protein, and we all know what protein is. But if we misuse nitrogen, or we use nitrogen over and above the requirements of plants, then we can see losses to the environment, whether it be through leaching into groundwater or into the atmosphere, and it can contribute to greenhouse gases. Plant and Food Research are involved in a number of projects. Some of these projects revolve around working with growers and farmers to make smarter decisions on farm, particularly around how they use their nutrients and their water. We also talk to them about what crops to grow, when to grow those crops, and how to grow those crops, so that they're essentially maximising the productive potential of their land, but also doing it in an environmental and an economic way as well.
Acting as kaitiaki for the natural environment includes looking at ways that our harm is either reduced or removed. So looking at ways that we can continue some of the necessary work, such as food production, and looking at methods that don't actually impact on native species. It's a fantastic aspiration, and most of all, our future generations will be celebrating the ecosystems that they're producing food for them and our markets.